For more on that call, let's bring in Wamsi Mohan, Senior Equity Analyst over at BofA Securities, along with our very own Steve Kovac. Steve, I'm going to start with you first for the state of play.
Sure.
These are arguably two of the most important stocks in the entire market. Yeah. They have a huge amount of influence.
Next to a little company called NVIDIA,
next to NVIDIA, which kind of dwarfs everybody these days. But when it comes to Apple and Alphabet specifically, this dynamic now is shaping the market narrative for sure today. What exactly does that competitive layout look like given this ruling?
Yeah, and it couldn't have turned out better for Apple unless they, the exclusivity thing, maybe if they allowed that to continue. But look, this gives Apple a chance to continue to collect that $20 billion a year or more. It's based on how often people search from Google. That's about a fifth of total services revenue for the year. It's a $100 billion business. 20% of that is coming straight from Google. So there's that. Then the negotiation part, I find this really interesting, and we'll talk to Wamsi about this in just a second here, is their ability to go back every year to Google as AI search becomes a bigger and bigger thing and a bigger market share of how people search for things on the internet. They can start using that leverage now and saying every year go back to Google and say, we got something good over here from OpenAI. We got something good over here from Anthropic. And by the way, Dom, they're already doing that. They are talking to all three players I just named about how to power Siri next year with this big AI update that they failed to deliver this year. They failed to build their own LLM. They're going to partner with one of these big guys next year to make that happen. So this really gives Apple more leverage, saying, you want access to our billion iPhone users? Great. Show us what you can got. And by the way, there's some real competition now, Google.
Of course. And so, Wamsi, let's kick off that conversation with you on that, because this has been in play for probably about 2 or 3 years now. This idea that search is going to be gradually, maybe if even rapidly replaced by using ChatGPT or other of these AI-type, search-type products. What exactly does this now mean, given the fact that there is now an annual renegotiation, a rejiggering of the state of play for all of these different players? The economics have to change. And what exactly does that mean for a company's future valuation?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Dom. Look, I think that the big thing here that we got to keep sight of is that this was a pretty big risk from an Apple standpoint. Steve just mentioned, $20 billion out of a $100 billion business. So on total company, it could have been 10 or 12% of earnings that could have gotten washed away if the ruling was adverse. And frankly, the ruling is not, which means that I think the buy side here was already expecting about 50% probability of it going the wrong way. And since it didn't, we actually think that an earnings cut of 10% was avoided, and half of that was baked in. So we think the stock should be up about 5%, just based off of the fact that there was so much negative headwind that was baked into Apple's valuation. So that's part of the reason why we raised our target price to $260. As we look into the future, the way we think about it is that the share of Google searches is clearly going down in the broader scheme of things, but the rate and pace of that will be something that will be managed. And then you also have Gemini, which could be substituted, whether it is AI search within Google, which could be augmented and potentially not cause a headwind, or it could be using Gemini models within Apple's own Apple Intelligence based solution. And obviously, they're talking to a bunch of companies, all the ones that Steve mentioned here, and that means that over time, Apple has this hedge versus just being exposed to Google's revenue itself.
Now, Wamsi, this is also an Apple story because Apple is in essence the platform for all of this, right? You can open yourself up to many of these, I'm going to call them apps. I know that's an oversimplification of it, but these AI products, these new kind of bolt-on tools are going to be on these platforms. What exactly does it mean for Apple's relationship and its future valuation, given the fact that all of these players may be part of the ecosystem or not at all, given their negotiations with Apple?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dom, and it's hard to prognosticate exactly who will be a winner over here, but the way we think about it is Apple is clearly going to be a winner. And why is that? The distribution of these is extremely, extremely important. I mean, it's been proven in search. I think it'll also prove itself in the Gen AI context. The payments might not be coming in the same way, though. The way we expect this to evolve is that Apple will strike a partnership to have these models ultimately run on Apple servers within Apple's own data centers so that they are the keepers of users' information. Remember, privacy is super centric to Apple. They're going to make sure that the data stays on their servers, which means that they might take the these models, train it on Apple silicon, run it on Apple servers at the end of the day, and extract value for customers that way, but keep this whole thing private. So it could be a licensing agreement that they do with some of these model providers, and there could be multiple of them. And depending on the use case, that gives them some leverage to negotiate across all of them, right? And so on the one hand, you've got sort of this model dynamic. The broader dynamic is obviously, these can be apps, put simplistically, running on your iPhone at the moment, and Apple will be monetizing those through its services business as usual by taking some kind of cut or revenue share in the more traditional sense of the App Store. So there are multiple ways of monetization. I think it just depends on the rate and pace of what Apple's internal development does relative to what these external providers are able to provide and the negotiating terms that they give to Apple.